Now let's work on adding and subtracting fractions. In order to be able to add and subtract fractions, we have to rewrite the fractions with a common denominator. Then we're simply able to add and subtract the numerators and keep the least common denominator that we found. Okay, so numbers 1 and 2 actually already have the common denominator. So I'll show you exactly what that's talking about. Whenever you already have a common denominator, that's the bottom number, all we have to do is take 5 and add it to 6. That's 11. And then you just get to copy the 13 over. Same thing over here. Because we already have the common denominator, all we have to do is do the 5 minus 7. That's a negative 2. Yes. And put it over the denominator that they already have in common. You only get to do that, and I'm going to put a little star by these, because they already have the common denominator. Most problems, we will have to find our own. That's why we learn to find the least common denominator. But it's actually a little easier than you think even. I'll show you a neat way to do it for these fractions. Now, this answer isn't quite finished because any time that you have a fractional answer, you always want to make sure that your answer is in its simplest form. Negative 2 over 12 does reduce by a factor of 2. So I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 2. My final answer will be negative 1 over 6. Now, let's go ahead and add the next two. These do not have the common denominator, so I'm going to show you the easiest way, I think, to find it. You can find it using the method that we showed before, but I think it's easier anytime that you have numerical denominators. Look at the largest one. It has to be a multiple of 6. Don't even mess with the little one. You can find him. That one will be more obvious. I'll show you what I mean. Look at the largest one first, because he actually could even be the least common denominator. Does 3 divide evenly into 6? Yes, so 6 happens to be the least common denominator. I want to be able to write each fraction with a 6 on the bottom. The second fraction already has it, so I can just copy him down. But how do I get this first fraction's denominator to look like a 6? We multiply by 2. And I do it to the bottom and to the top. The bottom becomes the 6, the least common denominator that I needed, and 2 times 2 becomes 4. Now all I have to do is add straight across. 4 plus 5 is 9, and I keep the denominator. Of course, now that's an improper fraction, but it's also not completely reduced. I notice that they both have a factor of 3 in common on top and bottom. That's going to leave me with 3 over 2 as my final answer. Now I want to show you what I was talking about before. This is the way that I encourage my students to find the least common denominator. With that last one, it was pretty easy because 6, 3 divided into it. But watch, and you can still do it the way we learned before. But if I have a 5 and a 4, start with the largest number. And you're going to write that down and say, does the other denominator or other denominators, if you have more than one, do they divide evenly into 5? And you'd say no. So then you do 5 times 2. Well, that's 10. Does 4 divide evenly into 10? No. 15. Does 4 divide evenly into 15? No. 5 times 4 is 20. See, you're just looking at the multiples of the largest number. 5 times 1, the 5 times 2, the 5 times 3, and then finally 5 times 4. Hey, 20 is going to be my least common denominator. Since I know that both denominators are going to go to 20, I look back up now and I ask myself, what do I have to multiply this 5 by to make it look like 20? 4. But anything you do to the bottom of the fraction, you're going to have to do to the top. So you get 16 over 20. Second fraction has to have the same thing. that 4 has to look like 20. In order to make it look like 20, I have to multiply by 5. But if I do it to the bottom of the fraction, I have to do it to the top. So I get 15 over 20. Now 16 over 20 minus 15 over 20, remember you just do it to the top. 16 minus 15 is 1, and you keep the denominator. Let's keep going. And again, pause or rewind the video if I move too quickly. For 6 and 4, I'm going to start with the 6. 6 times 1 is 6. Nope, 4 doesn't divide into it. 6 times 2 is 12. 4 does divide evenly into 12. That's him. So once I know that the least common denominator is going to be 12, and all you do is look for factors of the largest one, 4 has to divide evenly into him in order to be the least common denominator. Kind of cool. We'll keep doing it until you get it. Now, how do I make 6 look like a 12? I'll multiply by 2, but if I do it to the bottom, I do it to the top. And 2 times 5 is 10. On the second fraction, how do I make a 4 look like a 12? I multiply by 3, but if I do it to the bottom, I do it to the top. And 3 times 3 is 9. Now, subtract. 10 minus 9 is 1 over 12. And that is already reduced, so I don't have to do anything. Here's the next one. 8 and 6. I'm looking at the 8. 8 times 1 is 8. I know 6 doesn't divide into 8, so that's not it. 8 times 2 is 16. Nope. 8 times 3 is 24. Okay, hold on. 8 divides into 24 because that was him, and 6 divides into 24. We found it. 24 will be my least common denominator. To make the 6 look like a 24, I had to multiply by 4, but if I do it to the bottom of the fraction, I do it to the top. Makes it 4 times 5, or 20. To make the 8 look like 24, I have to multiply by 3, but if I do it to the bottom of the fraction, I'm going to do it to the top. 7 times 3 is 21. Now subtract. 20 minus 21 will be a negative 1, because you subtract and keep the sign of the larger, and then you keep the denominator. Guys, it works exactly the same way with 3 numbers. For 4, 3, and 2, I'm going to take the biggest one. 4 times 1 is 4. Unfortunately, 3. Now, I've got to make sure that 3 and 2 divide into whatever I find. So 4 is not going to work for the number 3, so let's keep going. 4 times 2 is 8. Same thing. 3 does not divide into 8. 4 times 3 is 12. Hold on. 4 divides into 12. 3 divides into 12, and so does 2. I found it. That is my least common denominator. Now, how do I get this 4 in the first fraction to look like a 12? I multiply it on top and bottom by 3. 3 times 1, 3 times 4. How do I get a 3 to look like a 12? I multiply it by 4, but if I do it to the bottom of the fraction, I do it to the top of the fraction. That is 4 times 1, 4 times 3. How do I get this? Oh, you know what? I messed up on a sign. Let's fix it before we get too far. That should be a minus. All right. How do I get the 2 to look like a 12? I'm going to multiply by 6, but I can, if I multiply the bottom of a fraction by 6, I have to multiply the top of the fraction by 6. 1 times 6 is 6, and we're ready. I'm going to do 3 plus 4, that's 7. And 7 minus 6 is going to give me 1, and I keep the denominator. Let's keep doing it. I'm going to start with the 5. 5 times 1 is 5. That's not going to work. 5 times 2 is going to be 10. I can count by fives. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 4 is 20. And some of you can already see it. That is great. 5 times 6 is 30. And I'm looking at it. Wait a minute. 3 divides into 30, but 4 doesn't. Do you see what I mean? And you just kind of look at them until you find the one that works. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 8 is 40. 5 times 9 is 45. 5 times 10 is 50. 5 times 11 is 55. 5 times 12 is 60. Okay, I'm suspicious of 60. And again, this is just one way, or you can find find the least common denominator with the least least common multiple that we did before. Now let's see here, 60. 5 divides into 60, 4 divides into 60, and so does 3. All right. To get the 5 to look like a 60, I had to multiply by 12. So I'm going to have to do it to the top and bottom of that fraction. 3 times 12 is 36. Excuse me. To get 4 to look like 60, I can divide. 60 divided by 4 is 15. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 15. 15 times 1 is 15. And then to get a 3 to look like 60, I have to multiply top and bottom by 20. 5 times 20 is 100. All right, so I know my answer is going to go over 60, but I'm going to do the addition and subtraction over here. I'm going to start with the 36 minus 15. That's going to be a 1. That's going to be a 2. And to that, I'm going to add 100. So I get 121 over 60. Unfortunately, one thing I know is that that is an improper fraction. Luckily, I happen to know that 121 is 11 times 11, and 60 is not anywhere near that. It doesn't have an 11 that divides into it. So luckily, that is our final answer. It is an improper fraction, though, isn't it? All right, on the next video, you'll see improper fractions and mixed numbers.